First of all, welcome to all the folks around the world, literally. So, so far, what do I see? Dubai, London, all over the US, and then good morning from Chicago. So, welcome aboard, everyone. And we've got an exciting breakout panel for you this morning. And we've got some amazing speakers. And basically, what we're going to do is be talking about the workforce of tomorrow. I know, big topic. But in order to help narrow things down and ensure that we probably, stay on track, so to speak, what we're going to be doing is, breaking this down into 4 areas where we'll get a bit more specific. So just a brief introduction. My name is Bob. I'll be the moderator for this session. And basically, my interest in HR goes back 20 years ago. Where I was advised by a mentor not to pick a job or a career, but to have a mission. So my mission was, I thought HR was broken at the time, back in the early 90s, and made it my mission to fix HR. So basically, I've been a labor and employment lawyer, I've been CHRO, VP of HR, HR director, facilitator, executive coach, and most recently I've been in the HR tech field. So, basically my mentor was right. If you have a mission, it doesn't matter really what you do as long as you're advancing the mission, and it's made for an exciting career that has taken me around the world literally a few times. So, but this is not about me. I've got some brilliant people I'd like to introduce the audience to. So first of all, based on the screen, I will go to, I don't know if it's on the screen, the right or the left, but I will, Laura, introduce herself and kick this off.
Hi, everyone. Laura Goodrich. I'm excited to be here. I have focused on change in the future of work for 2.5 decades. I don't have all of the answers, not even close to it, but I'm here. When you talk about mission, Bob, we've always been dedicated to paving a way to the future in a successful way. So really committed to figuring it out, however that might be.
All right. Thanks, Laura. Next up, we have Sally.
Hi, I'm calling in from the East Bay near Berkeley, California. I am a recovering workaholic. So I grew up in the Midwest, where you learn to work hard all the time. And then I moved to Manhattan, where you worked all the time. And then I moved to the Bay Area, where you work all the time. And so I had sort of my wake-up call when I had a tragedy happen when I was pregnant. I lost my brother in a plane crash. And it made me rethink work. And I was running customer experience and loving the job, but realizing that the balance between being a professional and then being a parent when tragedy happens was like, I have to change my career. So I started a company around how might we do our best work on terms that work for our full life without regrets. And back in the day when I called it Flexperience, I didn't know that flexibility was a stigma in social science, and that was violating this ideal worker norm. So I struggled, learned a lot about social science. I read it for fun now and neuroscience. And so I renamed it Forshay, which is my brother's name. So he's my inspiration for rethinking work. And it's basically interim talent. How do we have more fluid ways of thinking about the future of work? And then it's evolved into executive search because it was actually Pixar who said, you really understand social science and you always have a diverse slate. And that was a common back in the day. Bob, we've been doing this for a while, back to like not how many years. And then we really moved into inclusion and diversity, knowing that the system of work is more important than just recruiting. So I'm similar to the other speakers, really just curious, trying to figure things out, trying to make work better, and have way more questions than I have answers, but I've learned a few things and I'm happy to share. Yeah.
Great stuff. All right. So following along in a circular motion, we'll hear from Kathi next.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Kathi Enderes, and I am from Europe, where I think there is a little bit more balance between work and life, or people, I think, work to live, not live to work a lot of times. So I grew up in Austria, and I studied mathematics, so I got into HR and human resources consulting, I think by accident. I started my career in management consulting back in Austria, and moved to London, and then accidentally, I think, moved to San Francisco a long time ago, about in 2000. And I never left again. Or I did leave to live in Spain for a couple of years just recently. And I've always been interested in all of my experiences, how to make work better for people. So making work better and making work more human and making work more interesting and engaging, because we spend a lot of time, even in Europe, we spend a lot of time at work. And so how can we make it so that people can actually do their best work and have work be fulfilling and interesting and just good, basically, to do. So that's what I'm here for now, for this event, and what I'm really helping or trying to help organizations do as well.
Excellent, thank you. Up next is Kerry.
Hi, Kerry Brown. So my litmus test is really, how do people's jobs change? So if I look at some of the experiences in the areas you focus on, many are similar, many are a little bit different, but same space. I have been a customer of SAP's for 12 years, and I've now been at SAP for almost 16. And my focus has always been around people. My initial education was actually in sports marketing. I thought I'd grow up and run the Olympics, and it didn't do that. But if you think about the social aspect and the marketing aspect and really the messaging aspect in terms of engaging people, that's still very much, I would say, what I've been focused on in organizations. And it's that same, how do you engage? How do you connect? How do you inspire? And in terms of work-life balance, I'm originally from Vancouver. And when I go home, I think, wow, everyone looks like they're doing recreation and activity outside. I live in the South, where I've also learned there's a reason why everyone learns how to saunter, because it's humid. So I'm in New York today, and a little bit of a mixture of where I spend my time, but happy to be here today. Thank you.
All right, and then last but certainly not least is Stacia.
Yes, thank you. Kerry, you could still do it. Don't give up on the dream. Yeah, so I'm Stacia Garr, and your all personal stories of how you got into this space got me thinking as you were talking. And I started, I guess, in this space about 16, 17 years ago, somewhere in there, and had done grad school actually in London, kind of with the European connection. And then afterwards, I had a master's in history, and didn't think I wanted to do a PhD in history, but knew I loved research. And so a friend of mine said, why don't you come join this company, the corporate executive board? They've got all these smart young people who know how to do research, but may not know a lot about the specific area at the time. And so I said, sure, why not? So they offered me a job, and they said, do you want to do research on people or on technology? And at the time I was like, oh, no tech. Like I want the people thing. Little did I know that, here we are, and tech and people are so deeply intersected. I think if I would have chosen either path, I might have ended up where I am today. But so from there, I was with CEB for a long time, was with Bersin, where Kathi is now, and then started my own company, kind of on a similar journey to Sally, in that, had some things shift in my life and wanted to think a little bit differently about how I did work. But for the sake of today, two things that we've been doing research on that I think are really important are some of the things that actually make us human. And so if we think about us competing against the robots, which is a terrible framing, but one that a lot of people use, there are things that we do that are different and special. And so we've done some research on what makes us human. And then on the other side, we're doing some research on what makes organizations sustainable, so long-term sustainable, and how does that translate into the organization of the future. So we're calling these organizations responsive orgs, and this is research we haven't published yet, but I'm happy to share kind of some of our perspectives and how those two things actually align in some really nice and interesting ways.
Great. All right, fantastic. Thanks, Stacia. So, and thanks for setting up our topics that are coming up, because what we're going to do is, as I promised in the beginning, we are going to look at 4 different areas. So the first one, we're going to look at the workforce itself. And, frontline employees, gig economy people, freelancers, folks starting out of school, what do they need to do to prepare, to be the workforce of tomorrow? The second piece is we're going to talk about leaders, right? What skills, abilities, knowledge will they need to manage this workforce of tomorrow? The third topic area we're going to cover is going to be who's doing it well now. What are some examples today, right? So people always think, oh, that's too hard, or yeah, it's the Jetsons. We'll do it in 10 years. Actually, the future is here now, right? And the group that we have is probably part of it and has a lot of great examples in that area. And then the last piece, we'll wrap it up with, what can HR, people and culture, people, departments, human capital, whatever, talent, whatever you call yourselves, what can you do today, right, to start preparing yourselves? So, first, the first piece is interesting, right? So, Stacia, thanks for setting that up, right? Because you talked about making things more human. We understand that technology is changing and advancing quite rapidly, actually, exponentially. So I'm going to turn it over to you and say, okay, beyond technology, right? Beyond improving on analytic skills and your IT skills and things like that. Great. Yeah, that's been talked about a lot. But with, the intellectual, horsepower I have, within this group, I want you to talk about some of the more human knowledge, skills, and abilities that, frontline folks will need to have in their proverbial toolbox in order to succeed as the workforce of tomorrow. So I'll go ahead and hand it off.
Yeah, sure. So when we were thinking about, this human topic and what makes us human, there were actually 4 things that we came up with that were different about people. The first is that just fundamentally people have an ability to envision a different future. So, if you think about what robots can do or what computers can do, they can compute along a current, kind of path, as it were. But humans have the ability to say, like Kerry, I want to run the Olympics one day, and I'm going to create this reality of how I could go and do that. And so that is one thing that's fundamentally different. The second is that we tell stories. So we don't just compute out data, and as a researcher, sometimes that's hard for me, but we tell stories around what it is that people can connect to, and they see themselves in the story. The third thing they do differently is they collaborate. So we, as humans, collaborate often way past the point at which it is necessary for us as people to do so. So the basic reason for our collaboration is to survive, but we do it much longer. And so that's the third point. And then the fourth point is that we use tools in a completely different and I would say better way than most other creatures in this planet. And so if you combine those together, what does that mean then for the skills of the future of people? It's that vision setting. So where are we going? Inspiring others, creating a sense of what is possible. Second, helping people understand how they do it, how others have done it, and how they see themselves within the story. And often that is within a time of a lot of ambiguity. And so the ability to do that and to manage through that ambiguity and to use stories as kind of your touch point to do so is critical. The third, that collaboration piece, there's a lot of stories about the need for empathy and for humanity and for connection. And I think that all kind of ties in together. And then, I know you deliberately excluded tools, Bob, but I think, how we use technology, and particularly how we use technology to create and get to that different future is going to be one of the most critical things. So those are some of the first points of what we've seen in our research.
Okay. Anybody else like to chime in?
Sure. Go ahead. Oh, I'll go. So it's Kerry, and I'm actually going to put this in the chat so you can all see it later. But the World Economic Forum actually identified the human skills that people are looking at. And I'm putting them right now so everyone can see them, but they're really those human skills that we all have that are innately us. So, Sally, you mentioned being curious, and I actually have the Little Miss Curious t-shirt. But if you think about it's totally me, but creativity and communication and collaboration, as you mentioned, Stacia, adaptability, leadership, all of those things that robots can't do and can't be taught. They're things that we can hone and build over time, and we start with sort of infant pieces of them as children, and we learn them on playgrounds, and then we learn them on teams. And when we learn them on teams as adults, and we start to hone those skills, which allow each of us to make a different contribution, either as an independent leader, an individual leader, or as a professional leader where you have responsibility over people. And so those skills really are those human skills are the things that I see organizations needing to focus on, in particular as you change who's in the workplace. So it's interesting, VaynerMedia, who Gary Vaynerchuk, if you know who Gary V is, they did 3 of the ads for the Super Bowl, if you don't know who that is. But for example, they took off, their chief heart officer, Claude Silver, took off years of experience in education from their job postings because they realized that people can have fantastic media skills when they're 16 and 17 and have figured out how to have, hundreds of thousands to millions of followers, and they don't need to go to school for 4 years to get that. Yet they're also 18 or 19. So when you think about how they play in an organization, there's skills that they need to hone and build around listening and communication and leadership that they haven't had the time to practice and build muscles and capability in. So those skills are the skills, for them, as an example, they looked at a whole program around where feedback is a gift. And so as you think about how to participate either as a leader or a contributor individually, how do you give and receive feedback non-defensively and productively? So to me, I think some of those skills are the things that all of us, in particular in the digital world we live in, are those skills that make us more or less meaningful in the workplace.
All right.
I'll build on. This is Sally. So I have like a love-hate relationship with Gary Vee because he says so many things. I'm like, yes. And then he has this bravado that's very like kill yourself, which is not yes to me.
Yeah.
Building on that, I think the three things are science. So I didn't see the social science when I was working hard. I didn't understand neuroscience. Now we know so much more about neuroscience because MRIs are not as expensive. So for me, as I'm teaching my kids, because I have teens, when I think about how do you thrive and succeed, it's one, just whatever element of science you like. It doesn't have to be technology, right? It can be social science or neuroscience or choose your science, but it decodes the world. So just finding some element of a skill that you're curious about within science that helps decode the world for you. The second one is communication. So the storytelling that was brought up, if we can't communicate great science, then what's the point, right? So we need to be able to have the communication. And then the last is the well-being. I actually think well-being is a superpower because it fuels our creativity. So rather than feeling like we need to work all the time or crush it or all the super like heroic, at the expense of our well-being, we actually are not most creative when we are at that point, right? We make more mistakes. Frankly, we have a shorter lifespan. We don't get to saunter in the South. So I see those three things as when we talk about thriving and succeeding as this growth mindset and ways to apply it where we get to enjoy life, like Kathi was saying, and be a little European.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Laura?
I have a couple of comments. Stacia, the vision piece, I think it's hard right now because it's very difficult for us to envision some of these futures. It's very difficult for us to anticipate, sort of like as Ford said, if they had asked the people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And we're at that place where it's very difficult for us to envision, what is next. And then another comment, Sally, on the whole having the time to really put into thinking about and being creative about the future is complicated today in the fact that there's a talent shortage. Many organizations are struggling at backfilling the roles that they need, and that just means that people are flying by the seat of their pants from one meeting to the next. And that's not the place that we come up with our greatest ideas, that we can vision for the future, or we can share stories. And, at the foundation of everything that we do, storytelling is a powerful way to help us, transition from one place to the next. But if we've got our head down and we're very task oriented, that's extremely difficult to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do now, and I see there's a
I
comment.
want to add another comment too. And it actually goes to some of the questions that we have here. Is how do we actually make more systemic changes in our organizations for hiring and management? So we hear a lot about reskilling in the future of work, right? Organizations, when we work with organizations, they always ask us, like, how do we reskill? How do we keep up with these skills? How do we help people reskill? And the skills change so quickly, the actual skills, when you talk about the technical, functional skills, it changes so quickly. Like we see that it's like a half-life of 2.5 to 5 years. now, and it's probably going to get faster and faster. And so that reskilling trap is actually, I think, the wrong mindset. So how do we keep up with this? Because skills are always going to be important. Of course, the actual, what we call skills is the technical and functional things. What we talked about here, we call that human capabilities. So the human capabilities are the capabilities, the essentially human skills, those skills that machines can't do. Machines can't do any of these things that you all mentioned, that we all mentioned, the empathy, the communication, the imagination, coming up with the questions. I love that quote from Pablo Picasso where he said, computers are useless. They can only provide the answers, because they can't ask the questions. Asking the questions is a human thing. It's not a machine thing. And but yet, so I think everybody acknowledges that. Many organizations actually acknowledge that. But yet, when we studied that, we looked at thousands and thousands of job descriptions. Most of them actually still talk about years of experience. They talk about degrees. They don't talk about the outcomes. They don't talk about proven expertise or results, right? So organizations are still, although they acknowledge, some of them acknowledge that, they don't source for that. They don't acquire people for that. And also when you look at the resumes that people submit, or their profiles that people submit, most of them say, oh, I have 15, 20 years of experience doing X, Y, Z, right? So it's still a laundry list of things. And so I think organizations actually have to start changing how they look for people, how they look, and not just look for people, look for these capabilities wherever they are, whether they are employees, whether they are what we call the alternative workforce. So accessing these capabilities within their organization, outside of their organization, by changing how they portray the jobs of the future. So portraying jobs of the future shouldn't be a laundry list. These are your responsibilities, because we already all know that by the time you have posted a job description, it's already obsolete. Nobody actually works in the job description that they were sourced for if you're employed at all, right? And people acknowledge that readily. But yet, for some reason, we haven't made that shift, both from the organizations and from the individual's perspective. So, and we have access to, again, 85,000 job descriptions where we actually looked for that, and most of them, the vast majority, still talks about job responsibilities, not value provided, years of experience, degrees, all of those kind of things. Kerry, you wanted to, I think, make a note on that.
I think I would say that you're right in terms of the volume of companies en masse. That's true. And however, it's changing. So yes. I'm seeing more companies remove those things. I'm also seeing things like, in our solutions, we've now got machine learning that removes bias. So the things that we've historically put into that, it uses machine learning to feed back to you that job description you have or the things you're asking for are creating a bias that is reinforcing the past. So when I look at the kinds of skills and the processes, so for example, some of the FANG companies, so the Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Google, etc., where yes, Sally, they all work way too hard, but you're now hiring people who are coming in and they're saying, you know what, come on in and for the first 3 months, figure out what your job's going to be. We're hiring you for your aptitude and your possibilities employee, and you actually can craft for us what that job should be. If you look at companies like Lululemon, where they will actually ask people to say, where do you want to be in 5 years? And encourage them to look at what they want to be doing, even if it's not staying at Lululemon, so that they thrive while they're present. And in fact, they encourage employees, if there's a job they should have that doesn't exist in the company, to create that job. So that's not new. They started doing that. So I think there's companies who culturally are embracing different approaches to that. The other thing, Kathi, that you mentioned is sort of the alternative economy. And if you look at the gig economy, really one of the things I think that's happening either inside corporations or independently, and frankly, I think I'm one of the few on this call who doesn't work themselves. The gig economy is making all of us take over our own careers. And whether or not that's inside a company where your side hustle inside a company becomes your full-time job inside that company, or all of you have taken your side hustle in your careers, I think everybody's got the chance to really become more of what they want to be than being in a box. and moving, if I look at the trend historically, if you were an accountant, you became a senior accountant, you became a controller, a CFO. I do this, then on a project I do that, and I really change my role, and I have to unlearn the stuff that I used to know and learn something new. And I would say that's a burden or a responsibility of all employees. This goes to the skills you have either the leader or the individual, and it's really the ability to unlearn and learn new things, because we can't rest on our laurels and do things always, because they become obsolete so much faster.
Okay. We need to move on to topic number 2, because, as Kerry just mentioned, or put on the side, right? If you're talking about the human skills, critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, collaboration, Stacia mentioned, talk about the ability to see the future. This is an amazing skill set to have, right, in terms of your toolbox. But for a manager or a leader, that can be quite daunting, right? All of a sudden, you've got these people who are, literally like a runaway train. They're telling stories. They're collaborative. They know how to use these tools. They may know. Gone are the days where the leader was expected to know more about everything than the people they managed. That's almost reversing. Maybe not. Agree, disagree. But I'm going to turn it back over the panel and say, what skill set do human skills, do leaders need to, take on themselves to ensure that they're able to lead and add value to this workforce of tomorrow, right? Because we just outlined some amazing, set of knowledge, skills, and abilities that these people are going to have. That's quite a challenge for leaders. So let me turn it back over to you.
I have a quick question. Can everyone on the panel, because we're all hearing feedback and I'm seeing it in the thing, maybe when not talking, let's keep it muted instead of reverberation. So just when you're talking, unmute and see if that helps.
Okay, so who would like to go first?
One thing I would say is that leaders are going to need to demonstrate their capacity to stop in the moment when facing challenges and really explore different angles to solving those challenges. I mean, they are being watched, and so the first place that has to begin is that they're demonstrating their willingness to be creative, be innovative, look at how the marketplace is changing, look at these emerging technologies, and help not only themselves demonstrate they're doing it, but really fostering that on the team. One of the things that we're seeing is that habit is a powerful force. It is one of those things that we'll lean on, and we can become, and we see a lot of this really being tethered to, well, that's the way that we've, and it's really critical that, that leadership is shown one leader at a time, one team at a time, and that there's an established accountability, that we're not just going to go with that knee-jerk reaction. We're going to together, find better ways to do things. And the other thing that I want to really make note of, because I think it's particularly in the HR space, there's this notion, it's like, it's all the people and it's people skills, and it is, but there's sort of the throwing the technology under the bus in the same time. And I think that we don't do anyone a favor when we make technology the villain, because it's not the villain. It's the combination of really great human skills along with those technologies. And there's a lot of people that are resisting learning them. And they're leaning on that. I'm a fantastic communicator, but if I don't adopt those technologies, even if I've got the best human skills, I'm not the best employee going forward. I have to be able to appreciate both and not look at one as being superior to the other.
I'll add on to that, because I totally agree. And I think leaders, what I'm seeing the difference is leaders who, we got promoted because we did our individual contributor role well. And, still today, I see companies where not really teaching the managers then how to be a manager or a leader, but just be that hero worker. That goes back to this social science, right, that we're still trying to unpack. So I think the skill of the future is understanding how teams do their best work and not being so focused on the hero And so how we think about performance management being more team-based, more versus individual, I think that's a real career shift. So I'm starting to see this too in terms of like when you look at well-being surveys or performance surveys, how do we look at where things are intersecting, where a leader is really getting sustainable performance from her or his team versus unfortunately kind of the way that work was done before, which it can have bias, you know, and it can go to that individual worker, and then you can create this competition inside instead of collaboration. So I think leaders who really pay attention to how teams do their best work are going to be the leaders of the future.
And I would add on to that, kind of building from what you said, Sally, it is the leaders need, I think leaders of the future need to be thinking about the structure that's in place, the system in which they and then the people who are working with them are working, because I think it's very easy for us all to say that leaders should do X, Y, or Z differently, but if they are working within a structure that doesn't have the right incentives to do so, if the jobs are not designed in a way for them to spend that little bit of extra time to think about how could I do this differently, how could I do this without bias, how could I think through these different things, if that structure isn't in place, we can ask for all the heroic managers and great behaviors that we want, but we all know it's not going to get done. So I think if you're thinking about a new skill set or one that they should be taking on more fully, and that is thinking about the system that they and the whole leadership team are creating for workers to work in to make them much more successful.
I'll add to that too. You mentioned, Sally, you mentioned the performance management and how we evaluate leaders, and some of our research on performance management actually showed that high-performing organizations evaluate leaders not just for like their P&L or their like accomplishing, of course, the financial and all of that, but for the engagement of their team. So engaging that team really, really being important, and balancing that, like the business metrics with the people metrics, and the team. Individuals and teams actually owning performance management rather than this top-down. I also saw a comment about management not being command and control, but more coaching and supportive. And all of that is something that organizations need to take accountability on to help actually their leaders develop that muscle, because most of the times people actually don't know what that means. They don't grow up knowing how to coach, and if they don't experience it from their managers, which most of the times they don't, right? They might have experienced management for like, I'm gonna crack the whip, hold people accountable for doing the stuff. Then they won't know how to do that. And most organizations don't provide actual management training, still don't, on those human capabilities of leaders, of being more the coach, the supporter, the creator of the environment, remover of the barriers to success for their teams. Good leaders have always done that. So it's not entirely new. So if you look at what, if you think of the best managers that you can think of, they've always done that. So it's not entirely new, but fostering these and showing it's not just the people that get the best business results, but the best sustainable business results, because you won't be able to sustain it, right? So the sustainability, and I think Stacia, you mentioned that in the beginning too, sustainable results are only possible if you are actually creating that team environment where people can do their best work.
I'd also add that if you look back at the idea of a superpower, I think one of the superpowers of a great leader is enlisting the superpowers of their people. And if we think that right now the average tenure of a worker is 2.8 years, historically it was sitting around 11 or 13. You know, the change now is there's a lot of choice. So the experience of the employee based on what they have with the organization will keep them and engage them and bring out that superpower, or not, and then they'll leave and go find some other place to thrive or live or explore that. And so one of the things certainly that if you think about demographically, you know, we're sitting with the boomers that continue to be in the workplace have a lot more choice because they're at the point in their career where they have enough wealth and enough choice, enough experience, and enough flexibility based on their kids being out of college. And you have a massive population of millennials coming in who are not wedded to and committed to an organization the same way that people were, 15 years ago. To the point earlier by many folks is that the development around people is changing. So the burden on corporations to develop people is growing. We really had a pretty static workforce for about 20 years who could shift around and move from spot to spot, and we weren't needing to develop them. Arguably, one could say that that's not true, but they had a lot more skills to share and transfer. There was a question earlier around transferable skills. And now we have a lot more new leaders. We have a lot more people in new roles where the need to learn and grow both professionally and skill sets to the actual execution of the work, but also as leaders is changing. And I am seeing more organizations invest much more significantly around either leadership skills or just pure training to get people capable to make those shifts at scale.
All right. Well, thank you for that. So now we're going to move on to topic number 3, which is, are you part of, are you aware of other organizations? I see some of you have been sharing some things in the notes, but organizations who are doing it right today, right? Because typically, you know, what I hear from a lot of HR folks is, yeah, I go to Disrupt HR, go to, you know, not Hacking HR, but other HR conferences, right? And they said everybody talks in theory, but nobody tells me who's doing it or that it can be done. Everybody talks theoretically. So what we want to do here at Hacking HR is give people, not only inspire them, but give them practical tips, and maybe folks who are currently doing it, you know, maybe attach a resource, you know, in the notes and so on and so forth. So I'll turn it back over to you. You know, it's not be all end all, but you each of you have an example of somebody who is doing it right in either the one or both areas that we just talked about, in terms of that future skills development for either being, you know, basically turning the worker of tomorrow into a polymath, basically, right? Or they call it T-shaped individuals, or the leaders, you know, to learn some of the skill set that you've outlined in terms of being more collaborative. And I heard, you know, the superpower of the leaders to develop the superpowers of their employees, right? Who's doing that today? Who's been successful at it? Where can we find it? Is there an article, you know? So I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, I'll go first and see everyone's silent. I give a couple of examples around VaynerMedia and Lululemon. I'll also give one that we're doing right now. We've actually launched an established talent program. So while we've actually done a lot in the last probably 7 to 9 years around early talent, and so we have lots of layers, if you will, on how to build and recruit and retain and grow that talent, where there's rotation programs and development programs and grassroots as well as top-down connections. Honestly, it opened up a blind spot, frankly, around our established talent who equally have some interest in changing shaping of careers. So we're looking at, do we have sharing of jobs or part-time work or rotations for the people who are in the last 1, 3, 5, 7 years of their career versus the first 1, 3, 5, 7 years of their career? Do we have that right? No, we're figuring it out now. And we're honestly also listening to the point Sophie said earlier. We're actually listening and asking that talent what they want or what they don't want. And so trying to get that same layering of content. What I would say is I do see a lot of organizations have built a lot of success around early talent growth and development. And many organizations, actually, as we've talked about, established talent have the same reaction of, we've forgotten about them and we've done business as usual for the last 10, 15 years. So that is definitely an opportunity for change. Other examples, oh gosh, there's so many. You know, in retail, there's a lot of focus on how to shift to the shift in talent around who's coming and going. One of the examples I want to give, we did some work with Enderes with sort of thinking about the moments that matter, and we've done that across other organizations, specifically to HR, is where are, you know, from an experience standpoint, what are the moments that make a difference for retention? So when you first get hired, the big boat company has done a lot around what is the experience when, you know, what is the experience pre-hire? So from the time you apply for the job, get the job, move through that cycle to being hired, and what does day one look like? They're actually, for example, they have an app, a chat bot that will chat back and forth with you in the first week and say, hey, do you need to know where the cafeteria is? Or, oh, by the way, like the things that are typical questions that really don't matter until you get the job. They'll actually engage with you with a chatbot for the first month, along with a buddy, along with other, there's multiple layers to that. So what's the first month look like? Because they had realized that for a long time they were hiring people and somebody might come in and their manager was busy that day, so they had nobody greeting them. So they really put a lot into that. I would also add then, thinking on those moments that matter is, when do you look like when somebody comes back from maternity leave? What happens when somebody shifts if you have rotations? So we're seeing in a number of different companies the focus on that. Delta Airlines is another who's doing a lot of work on that to change how they are connecting with the employees. They have such a large employee base who's dispersed. But those are a few examples. I'll pass it over to others to share more.
I'll build on that. I love the moments that matter. That's such good science on that, because we can't just like try and look at everything and peanut butter it, although I love peanut butter. So I don't know that I can name the company names, but I'll tell you what they're doing. So, because they're clients. Design thinking sprints are something that we've found to be a nice way of looking at that moments that matter, because how do you design something small and then test it and then know if it should scale? So to give you some specifics, so one startup in San Francisco did the employee onboarding because they realized they were spending so much money on recruiting, and then the people would come on board and like not have a computer and not know where to go and have no one speak to them because everyone was heads down. So they did a design thinking sprint on employee onboarding. I think that moments that matter will remain true and important in the future of work as it is today. Another really big one that we've talked a little bit about inclusion and diversity was a large company said, we know based on all of our data, and if we don't have data, everyone should have it, around promotions and performance evaluations and compensation and calibration sessions are biased. So even though we're really focused on pay equity just in general, there are these moments that matter around compensation of who's going to get the stretch assignment, who's going to get to go to Vienna for an international, right, get the larger equity package this year. And that's usually decided by humans in a room where they're doing their best to be fair, but unfortunately our brains are just wired for fast thinking. And so what they did was they did a design thinking sprint where they created an animation video that normalized and said, here's the science of how our brains work. Here's the neuroscience of it. Here's the social science in group and out group. So everyone has the information right up front before the meeting. It's 2 minutes. It's really cool. And then they had cards because this company was founded by artists. And so they wanted sort of an artifact that basically listed the main biases, and everyone at the table had it. So it wasn't the HR person's responsibility. It wasn't the person of color's responsibility. It wasn't the woman's responsibility. It wasn't the leader's responsibility. It's shared responsibility, back to the structures of change that we were talking about, that everyone raises their hand with the card when they say, oh, I think when we were just deciding who should get promoted, we were asking, Sally to do it again and again and again, but actually Gary V, we just thought, oh, he's got such great potential, right? And so it was a way of also, not calling a human out of like, you are biased, but like, I think the way we were talking about that, let's try it again. Let's look at the data and let's make these decisions. And so there's really nice ways to think about how you can apply design thinking to the employee experience that keeps it small in these moments that matter that companies are doing. And then once they test it, they can see what scales. So those are really, hopefully specific examples that people can do at home.
Yeah.
I just put one sentence on design thinking. If anyone's not familiar with it, the fact that it is focused on the experience and the consumer and the actual individual, it lends itself so beautifully to making sure that what you're crafting is what's needed and wanted.
Yeah, and I'll add to that for design thinking, not just in the employee experience, but about work itself. So one company that, financial services company, redesigned the actual work of financial advisors thinking with their workforce, the people that were financial advisors. And if you think about financial advisors, technology can actually do a large part of the job of financial advisor, right? Because you do stock portfolio modeling or like investment modeling, all of those things, algorithms can do much faster and cheaper and better and with less error. But rather than saying, okay, so technology takes a large chunk of the financial advisor, now we need less financial advisors. That company, the financial services company based on the East Coast, they use design thinking with the financial advisors to identify what new value could we provide to our customers that they have never thought about. And what they this what we call a super job of career advisor together with the financial advisor So they identified your clients could actually get more value out of it, out of the financial advice, if you also help them identify where they could maximize their income, not just how they spend the money, but how they make the money. Because if you think about it, the human skills are actually, human capabilities are the same, right? So the empathy, the asking the questions to understand where people want to be going, what they have, how they can spend that talent or the money, is it really the same things. And so they created these super jobs of career advisors and financial advisors, and the clients were delighted because the clients got a 2-for-1, right? But also the people, the financial advisors were delighted because they could actually offload all of the maybe the repeatable and the predictable, the actual stock portfolio modeling to machines, and work more with clients. And they got re-skilled for that because the kind of questions you ask might be a little bit different, right? And knowing the actual career advice might be a little bit different than giving financial advice. But that's just one example of how they actually redesigned not just the employee experience, but work itself. And I think this is a huge opportunity to reimagine what work is. And most organizations are not really doing that. But if you do, it has a huge upside potential, I think, to make work better and more human.
I'd like to add one example that goes to how we create the conditions. Building on my comment earlier, I think it's so important to create the systems and the incentives and the structure that enables us to do these things. So this example is about trying to encourage what one CEO we interviewed calls intelligent failures. And so the CEO actually requires his direct reports and encourages them to require their direct reports to make at least 2 intelligent failures per year. And so what that actually means is it's a risk that's been analyzed and determined to be worthwhile, but it may ultimately not have delivered value. So it's a great idea at the time, it's cutting edge, but if it fails, it's okay. So it's not any of these like, bet the whole house type of things. But kind of building into the incentive structure, hey, you need to have 2 of these a year and you should be encouraging that farther down, allows people to try some of these different things that we're talking about today. Because if there isn't an incentive to try some of these new skills or to do some of these new things, no matter if the organization's overall performance and continuance is dependent on it, as an individual, I can just leave and go to another company. Right? So like if this doesn't really work out, but if there's an incentive that says, hey, actually, we believe in you trying these new things, these new skills, these new approaches, and if it doesn't quite work out, that's okay. I think that's absolutely essential to making this come to life and be a reality for folks. So we wrote about this. The company was actually called Viventium. We've got a report called Humanizing Learning, and we kind of did a whole case profile on how they did that. But I think that structure component is super important.
Okay, Laura?
One quick comment on this. In all of these examples, the most powerful ways that we can push that more deeply into an organization is to share those stories. And to, really vividly tell stories of those that are doing these things well. And we can get those stories, and whether they're written or video, what have you, we can get them, we can push them out there much more easily today than we could have in the past. And that's a powerful way to build on those, those great ambassadors of these things, because we can be sure that, well, if an organization is getting better, they've got some shining stars that would be, really powerful. We always say that peer-to-peer influence doesn't stop at 16. It has and will always influence behavior. So find those great stories and share them.
Great stuff. Thank you. So now we move on to almost the rapid fire round, so to speak, because we only have about 8 minutes left. So over a minute, and since we're called Hacking HR, what would be the one hack or the one thing that we've got over 110 people listening to you right now. So if you were to give people homework or something to think about, right, when they got back to their office that they could put into action, right away, right? I know we're talking about the workforce of tomorrow, but even the journey of 1,000 miles beginning with the first step. What would be your advice for that hack or first step that they could take this afternoon, tomorrow, or early next week? All right. And so that, they could start on that proverbial journey of 1,000 miles, right? Workforce of tomorrow is quite a broad subject. But, as your examples have shown, companies are at, different levels in enacting this. So I'm giving you a little time to think about it by continuing to talk. So now I'll hand it over to you. And Sally, you're laughing. So I'm going to ask you to go first.
Mine is so ridiculous. I was going to say design thinking sprints, but we had already talked about it. So I was going to say read. Like, it sounds so trite, but I feel like back into the busyness of world, which is a 4-letter word, busy, that I've banned from my vocabulary. And people will say it to me. They're like, I know you're really busy, but, and I was like, nope, don't put that on me. I think we have to create space to be learners. And I know it sounds really basic, but it feels really hard. So back to the habits and structures of change. I read before bed. That's just my way of decompressing. So consider a habit that helps you be a learner and it doesn't feel zero sum in time so that you accidentally don't get to it.
All right, who's next? Who's got the nugget?
I'll give one. Linda Hoops, who speaks on resilience, she has a book on resilience. Actually, to your point, Sally, of building habits, she talks about actually stacking habits. So like, you floss your teeth and brush your teeth at the same time. So things that you do that combine. So whether or not it's reading in bed or what have you, but finding a way to not only think about when you do something, but a way to repeat it that it becomes more repeatable. The other thing around building that resilience to change is also looking for opportunities for you, back to whatever your superpowers are or your needs are. Where is it in the car, driving, traveling, on a plane, whatever, how to find those moments to grow. And my other piece on that is I would go back to curiosity, is don't look in the places you normally look. Whether it's politically, personally, or otherwise, we are all often quite guilty of reinforcing the things we already know and proving ourselves right. And I saw a comment earlier of we regularly look backwards to prove what we can do going forwards. Rather, look at the things that are kind of around you that are different, that allow you to have that stretch mindset. And Stacia, to your point of finding a place where you can fail. And if professionally that's not a safe thing to do, find a local organization or somewhere else to volunteer and try something where you can stretch yourself and do something where you would grow in an uncomfortable but productive manner. I think I cheated and I had more than one. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Hey, the more the merrier, right?
I'll add to that. The stacking habits is actually something that I do. I like to run a lot, and I also like to listen to podcasts. So I listen to the podcast while I'm running, and that way every day when I run, I listen to like an hour's worth of podcasts, and I get a lot of new ideas. And one thing that I actually listened to just a couple of days ago was the how to not fall into the advice trap. So we are, as humans, we're always wired to give advice, even when we're not asked to give advice. And how can you do that? How can you actually stay away from the advice trap a little bit longer? And the way that to do that podcast guest said is stay curious a little bit longer and hold back on giving advice a little bit longer. So ask the questions, stay curious, let the other person talk rather than jumping into the advice trap. Here's my advice, right? Oftentimes people don't even want your advice; they want to talk, and so get the answer from the people themselves, rather than giving the answers. Ask for the answers from themselves. I think that maybe I'll also stacked some of these advices, but curiosity I think is key, and stacking habits is key too, and staying away from giving the answer and just asking the questions.
All right. Laura, you look ready to go.
I'm going to tag on to where I started, because I believe storytelling is just a really powerful way that we can help people move forward. And one of the, to the point that you bring up, Kathi, is that, don't share a story and go, here's what you were supposed to learn from this story, but rather, here's a story, and what is your take on this? Or what does this mean to you? Or how does this, sort of relate to the work that you do or maybe doing in the future? And so that the natural thing, that the natural byproduct of storytelling is dialogue and conversation. And it is so critical that we create that space where dialogue and conversation can take place, because that's when we when we hear ourselves speak, a lot of times we'll go, whoa, I mean, I was off, we can do some course correction for ourselves in so doing. So storytelling, asking questions, and then creating this space for dialogue and conversation.
And to bookend this with Stacia, and we will give her the last word. So go take it away, Stacia.
All right. I'm going to go kind of a little bit different direction, in that while it's super important to get all of these different sources of information and ideas, you also need to create the space to do deep work. So shut off your email, shut off your Twitter, shut off it all, and give yourself consistently, if you can every day, space to really think and to analyze and to kind of get into that flow. I try to do it first thing in the morning before I get on email, like before my kids get up, because that's when I can do it the best. But I find it's like meditation or yoga. It's a practice, and it's something that if you get out of the habit of, it's very easy to get kind of mentally lazy. But if you create the space, I think you start to see connections, and you have original ideas and contributions in ways that you wouldn't. So you absolutely need the input of others to make different connections, but you need to create the space to do so.
Great stuff. And look at that, we are on time. So I would like to thank all the panelists for making time this morning and sharing, their knowledge and background and experience. You could tell I'm like a big nerd boy, fanboy here. So if you get a chance, look at their profiles on LinkedIn, and you just kind of go wide. Big fan of Stacia's work with RedThread as well, being in the HR tech sector. So I've read a lot of your reports. So for me, this was pretty exciting, and I hope those folks that were able to watch this got a lot out of it. As you can see from the comments on the side, they are sharing a ton of information. So credit to them for not only sharing their ideas, verbally. They're helping out folks on the side with links and thoughts and ideas and furthering. So thank you. It's in terms of helping the profession as a whole, credit to you, for not only sharing knowledge, like I said, verbally making time, but also, on the side panels and so on. So once again, a big thank you. You've made this nerd boy very happy this morning, and appreciate all your thoughts and ideas.